First, I just want to introduce Dorry, the Dorry that I know. Dorry was at Hopkins through his surgery training and then stayed on as a fellow at a time when I was the chief of transplantation at Hopkins. And he was very precocious. He wrote about 25 or so first author articles while he was getting his clinical training. And he had a unique skill set that he came to this work with. He had a background in computer programming and math. We both married up, for sure, and he married a real deal mathematician from MIT. And they had this amazing collaboration where they could, go away for a weekend and solve some important problem. I remember Placido Domingo once said that the reason he was such a great opera singer was that he played the piano, so he could always sing and always practice. He didn't require a coach or someone to accompany him. And I think that it's been a great strength for Dorry, too, to...
That I play the piano?
Yeah, that you play the piano. and Dorry is a great musician, too. And he produced and mixed the first album of the Ghetto Boys. It's something not many people know. And anyway, so there was a period of time when we were working on the same problems, and our two skill sets overlapped very nicely. And we did, it was a special time and a special place. And we did a lot of great things, I think, that, contributed to this field together. And then Dorry went on to run a gigantic lab. He deals with big data. He once came into my office and said, I have to kind of make a decision. Am I going to be primarily a clinician or primarily a researcher? And I said, Dorry, you have these unbelievable talents, and he's one of the smartest people I know in research, and I think that's what you should do. And he still operates, but most of his time is spent in the laboratory, and maybe that was one of the best leadership decisions that I made, was to sort of set Dorry on the world of research.
Yeah, you actually told me that my value won't be measured in the number of kidneys and livers that I can sew in, but the work that I can do that generalizes to things. So that's good mentorship advice. I guess I should introduce Robert Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery is most well-known, well, he's most well-known for his mustache, but he's second most well-known for his...
And cowboy boots that I don't have on.
For his contributions to incompatible kidney transplantation, where he created basically de novo the Johns Hopkins Incompatible Kidney Transplant Program, transplanting people across ABO barriers, across HLA barriers, transplanting incredibly difficult and challenging clinical patients at a time where those patients really had no other option whatsoever, and really as a beautiful, ingenious collaboration between a surgeon and a multidisciplinary team and an HLA lab, and really brought together brilliant people to make this possible, and grew a program that, as you all know, reached international achievement, and then took his leadership to the next stage and became the division director for transplant surgery at Johns Hopkins, and has recently taken the job to lead the Transplant Institute at NYU. And beyond just rising and achieving great things as a leader, the thing that I really respect about Bob was that he's a founding leader. So he led the incompatible kidney transplant program when there was no incompatible kidney transplant program, and he is now building the Transplant Institute at NYU, which is a brand new institute. And so his perspectives on leadership, not only come from holding a leadership position, but basically creating a leadership position. And for me, you know, I knew Bob before the mustache. There was a time before the mustache when I was doing my training at Johns Hopkins.
Before the beard.
Before the beard is like 3 months ago. So, watching all of this innovative stuff grow at Hopkins clinically, and when I started to do my fellowship and become immersed in the challenges that we were facing with our patients and the challenges that Bob was facing with growing incompatible transplantation, showing regulatory agencies that incompatible transplantation was the right thing to do, making sure that people didn't shut down our transplant program because of the challenges that we were taking on with these patients. For me, it was a unique opportunity to take the big data techniques that I had learned as a computer science major and a programmer for a computer science company, and link data sets that we had available to us that no one had ever really tapped into, and come up with ways to take something that was innovative and clinical and rooted at Johns Hopkins and try to get...
Well, I think, Dorry, you're being modest. I mean, you know, the problem was that we had this big program, people were coming from around the country, and we had this big clinical experience, but you can't really randomize patients who have a positive cross-match to, you know, desensitization versus nothing, right? Nobody would do that, right? So we had a big problem in that we had this big, you know, clinical experience, but I mean, nobody really knew the value of it until Dorry brought his tricks, you know, and the things that he learned about managing data, and was able to create a match control algorithm for really comparing our patients to a group of patients that wasn't transplanted and stayed on the list. And that's what made the difference between a AJT type publication that would have been interesting and a New England Journal paper that really, I think, was impactful. And it was this sort of synergy that we, you know, created for a number of years. And then it was time for Dorry to move on and kind of establish himself apart from me, and create this, you know, this wonderful lab. And I mean, I think, you know, it's one of the things that's not talked about very much is, you know, what is that like for the mentor to have someone who eventually completely outshines him? And you know, my wife, who's an opera singer, she says that the life cycle of an opera singer is that her name is Denise Graves. First is who's Denise Graves, and then I want Denise Graves, and then I want a young Denise Graves, and then it's who's Denise Graves. So I'm sort of entering the who is Robert Montgomery stage, right? And when you work with someone as we did, and then they go out on their own, it's sort of like a yeast that's budding, and they take part of you with them. And it gives you sort of a mixed feeling about that.
A good mentor calls you yeast.
And it also depends upon at what stage you are in your life cycle when that happens. So if you're still in the, you know, I want Robert Montgomery stage, then your mentee becomes your competitor in a way. And I think one of the great challenges, I think the most important thing in leadership is mentoring young people. And one of the great challenges is how to deal with that kind of conundrum, particularly when you're at that stage in your career. And I think, you know, you have to put your ego aside, and you have to start to think of your mentees as sort of like your children, that, you know, they're taking what you were able to give them and to a much greater level. And, you know, you grow into that role. I would say it doesn't happen absolutely naturally. And none of us, as someone said earlier, have any kind of formal training in this area. So I think Dorry was going to ask me, what's my biggest challenge in leadership, and I was going to say you. But I'll ask you, so what is the thing that you, as a leader, Dorry runs a lab of 80-some people, postdocs, and what did you do that you wish you hadn't done with hindsight? Like, what's the biggest mistake you made as a leader?
Mentor calls you yeast and wants to know about your mistakes. Yeah, so, well, it's a great question, and something that there are things that I've obviously learned the hard way in building this, because when I started my research group, it was me, and then it was me and one master's student sharing a 10 by 10 office, and obviously the leadership style at that point is very different from the leadership style now of having 10 faculty members in my group, and then each of them overseeing their own teams and having shared teams among the whole group. And learning how to shift leadership style across from very invasive, day-to-day, being involved in everything, to learning how to take pieces of the pie and hand them to somebody. And it's scary to hand somebody a piece of the pie, because then it's no longer yours. And if you're responsible, it belongs entirely to them. And then you hand another piece of the pie, and at the same time, then you have to make the pie bigger, because you know you need to grow it to give it to somebody else. And you try to think about the roles of everybody in the enterprise that you're building. And I guess I could name the name of the person that I learned this lesson on, but obviously I won't do that. The lesson was that you don't get to decide what the roles are of the people who work in a group, particularly in a group that's growing, where you didn't have a job that you posted and somebody comes in and has to work in that job. But if you're just bringing in brilliant people together and you're trying to give each of them sort of this opportunity for growth, you don't get to decide what the role is of these individuals. And the story that comes to mind was somebody who I hired as an analyst. And in my vision, everyone wants to get a master's degree, become an analyst, then get a PhD, get a career development grant, build their own enterprise, and sort of grow as an independent investigator. And I very enthusiastically, and not forcefully or coercively, but very enthusiastically sort of pushed somebody in that direction and continued to give them opportunities where they could be first author on papers and they could develop research ideas and things like that. And it seemed to be going well, and he was doing quite well. And then one day, all of a sudden, we got his resignation letter, and he went to go work as a, run-of-the-mill analyst at another place. And in debriefing, it turned out that this was not something he ever wanted. He just wanted to get a master's degree and come and analyze data from 9 to 5 and go home and never worry about it, and didn't, because of all the enthusiasm surrounding him, he was not willing to sort of express that. And so the lesson to me, and we remember these lessons every once in a while when we encounter them again, the lesson is that when you're hiring brilliant people, it is really for them to declare their role in the enterprise and not for you to sort of create that for them. And obviously the role that I had in whatever collaborations we had, your mentorship of me, and then what I developed thereafter, I don't think either of us could have predicted. And if you had created a place for me and said, this is what you must do, then it would have been very different.
I think I did that probably a few times, but I think a great advantage that Dorry and I have is that we grew up in the operating room, and pretty much everything you need to know about leadership you learn in the operating room. You have to be calm when everything's falling apart. People rely on you to do that, to lead them. They want that, okay? And that's one thing. You should never be ashamed of leading. Like, you should never feel, oh, I'm not really worthy of this. Because people want to be led, particularly in an environment like that.
And at the same time, they want to remain engaged.
Of course.
And so you want them to feel like they're part of the team, and that your success is their success, the success of the team is everybody's success, and that they're being heard, and that they're contributing, and that they get credit, and feel like that it was not just a one-person show with everyone kind of behind
Credit
them.
is very important.
Yeah.
As a leader, you end up receiving a lot of the accolades for things that other people in your group do. And it's so important that you point out that, this really didn't, belong to me, that this person did this work. Very important. I jotted down a couple of things that I just want to mention from my experience. First of all, I lead by example. I think that's my style. People have different leadership styles. And if you lead by example, you can't ever leave your colleagues in the lurch, like with a patient that you've operated. You can't leave town and have something bad happen. And when people ask me how's my day, I always say spectacular, right? Because you can't. You're the leader. Your eyes have to be on the prize, right? You're not going to tell them about all the problems. The dean just called you in and this and that, right? You've got to be solid in that way. And what goes along with that is never gripe down the chain of command, right? So it's always good to have somebody that you can complain to who's not working, for you. And I have that person in my administrator. She's also like a psychiatrist to me. And make your vision very clear to everyone who works for you. Do it formally. Write a white paper. Stand up in a situation like this and tell them exactly what the expectations are, what you want to create, what your vision is. And Dorry alluded to this earlier. I keep a piece of paper that has all the employees that are in the Transplant Institute on this paper with their picture, and I look at that, like I pull it out and look at it every day to make sure I know everybody's name. That's really very important. And I think, then there comes a point where your joy, as I mentioned earlier, comes from mentoring people and helping people to create the next great breakthroughs in the field. Do you have some thoughts, Dorry, on?
Yeah, I have a couple to add to that. One is this goes along with the very last thing that you said, which is to measure your success by the success of your mentees and not by your success at all. Once you become a mentor, it's not about you anymore. It's about your kids, basically. I joke that I have 80 children. They're academic children, I call them, because I really need to. If they are not successful, I don't feel successful. And if they are successful, then I do. And I think that's critically important. And they can feel that. And they know that you are proud of their successes. And that will make, because they have to measure themselves somehow. And they will measure themselves in your happiness of how they're doing. And I think another thing that we don't talk about a lot, but that's really important, is to collect feedback. So, open the door for people to criticize you, for people to question you, for people to give you feedback about your science, about your mentoring style, about your clinical style, about your personality, about whether the beard looks okay. I mean, leave room for feedback, because what happens is when you're the leader, people, they look up to you in a way that is uncomfortable almost, because you can say a wrong thing and they will not question you. And it's absolutely critical to actively create an environment where they feel as comfortable questioning you as you feel giving feedback to them, which is the more natural progression of mentor giving feedback to mentee. And there's, it sort of depends on what area you're in and what your personality style is for how to do this, but somehow make sure that you open the door for people to give you feedback. And we consider that drastically important in our lab, because we're doing science, and if we do science wrong just because the dumb leader, me, said to do it this way, then we're going to make wrong inferences. And so it's really important for that.
Just to tag on to that, it's important not to insulate yourself. Stay in your office, in the administrative block. And, Dorry has this great lab that's all open. It looks like Google or Apple. And, everybody is, has access to them. And I think that, that is very important. And I think maybe, like, the thing, and unfortunately, I think this is hard to teach yourself. Some of it, I think, is sort of you're born into this perception, but if you can see how other people see you rather than how you see yourself, that gives you a tremendous leg up when you're a leader. And again, I think it's at sort of the top of the pyramid in terms of important things to learn. It's not essential as a leader, but if you can do that, if you can tune your brain into when you do something or don't do something, to really understanding how other people see that can become really important. Do we have? Were you going to do a question or two, or
yeah? Well,
have time, or
this is wonderful, and this is go on forever. We are actually over time. We have some questions from the audience. I suggest that we will take one so that we can go on with the program. So this question from John Forsyth says different leadership styles are well described here, and the question that he asked is what style? How would you characterize your style? And Dorry, what did you pick or try to or imitate maybe from Bob?
Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I lead by example, but there's a hazard in leading by example because you can't get caught in the minutia, right? You have to be in the trenches, I think, if you choose that leadership style. But you have to maintain a separation from the people that you're leading, and not feel like you have to do everything to make sure it gets done right. You have to delegate.
Dorry?
Yeah, for me, the thing that I picked up the most from you and your mentorship style that I've carried fully through to how I lead my group is to always be available, to always be, answer your emails at 3 o'clock in the morning if you're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, take phone calls about urgent patients anytime, 24/7, and always make people feel like you may not be in the trenches, but make them feel like you are there in the trenches. And I think the thing that I do in particular for my group, because it's, our goal is science and not, advancing clinical work and things like that, is to really give people space. Gives people space to go in whatever direction they think is important, sort of use their creativity, because they will identify things that, the leader of the group is not able to identify.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Montgomery, Dorry Segev,